For today's movie review, I'll be reviewing Avengers Infinity War, the long-awaited sequel to the first Avengers movie ever since the Bad Titan himself, Thanos, first appeared in that mid-credit sequence that the other MCU movies have been building up to for the past several years. The movie is also directed by the Russo brothers, who have been known to direct the second and third installments of the Captain America movies, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Captain America Civil War. And because of this, they were hired to direct the third and fourth Avengers movie, which is an interesting topic in of itself, because when Avengers Infinity War was first announced, it was going to be a part 1, part 2 thing. However, as production progressed for the movie, Marvel for some reason changed things around. That way, the third and fourth Avengers movie would not be called Infinity Wars Part 1 and 2, but instead, they're calling the third Avengers movie Infinity War, and they're calling the fourth Avengers movie something else, even though the movie is a direct follow-up to the third Avengers movie. And despite the movie being called Infinity War, it's actually not based on the 1992 miniseries The Infinity War. Instead, it's a loose adaptation of the 1991 miniseries The Infinity Gauntlet, which is the quintessential Thanos obtains the Infinity Gauntlet and fights all of Earth's mightiest heroes with said gauntlet, while mixing it with some elements from the 2013 storyline simply called Infinity, which has Thanos attacking Earth with the assistance of a new group of supervillains called the Black Order. But anywho, it's actually amazing that this movie's even happening at all, because no one would have predicted that the whole idea of a shared cinematic universe would last as long as it has. Because when the first Avengers movie came out, everyone was expecting this movie to fail. Yet, when the movie did come out, not only did it do well at the box office, but the movie got good reception from both movie critics and audiences alike, to a point where we're now on phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe talking about the third Avengers movie. Like, I don't think anyone expected this whole trend of a shared cinematic universe to last as long as it has. And on top of that, it's been 10 years since the first Iron Man movie, which leads into my big question. Is Avengers Infinity War a good way to celebrate the Marvel Cinematic Universe's 10th anniversary? As for the plot of the movie, the Avengers, now divided in some shape or form, discover that a new threat in the form of the Mad Titan known as Thanos, who plans to obtain 6 powerful artifacts known as the Infinity Stones in order to destroy half the universe. Now it's up to the Avengers, along with several other characters ranging from the likes of Black Panther and his Kingdom of Wakanda, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange along with Spider-Man, to prevent Thanos and his entourage of henchmen from obtaining all of the Infinity Stones and prevent Thanos from destroying half the universe. Now, in terms of what I liked about the movie, let's start with the opening 5 minutes before the title sequence, because I think the first 5 minutes to this movie is the best opening to any of these Marvel movies, for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1, this movie sets up how threatening Thanos is as a villain, since not only do we see him holding Thor, who is beaten to a bloody pulp, but we also see Thanos fight Hulk moments later, only to beat him with ease. And keep in mind, Thanos at this point in time only has access to one Infinity Stone, and he doesn't use it against either Hulk or Thor. And the fact that Thanos was able to beat Thor and Hulk, who are 2 of the most powerful Avengers within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, demonstrates how dangerous Thanos is as a villain. Reason number 2, because we see Thanos defeat both Thor and Hulk with relative ease without using the Infinity Stone he has on him, this raises the stakes, showing that if Thanos was able to defeat Thor and Hulk, 2 of the most powerful characters in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, imagine what he could do if he got access to the other 5 Infinity Stones. Reason number 3, we see Thanos kill off 2 major characters that appeared in some of the other Thor movies, and this is basically Marvel telling the audience, we ain't screwing around anymore, we're not gonna play it safe, we're gonna let shit hit the fan. And because of this, the movie establishes the type of tone that's going to occur throughout the rest of the movie, making this one of the best opening sequences to any Marvel movie. Another aspect to this movie that I liked revolves around the overall production values that the movie has, regardless if it's the set designs, the costume designs, the special effects themselves, regardless if it's the motion capture that's used for characters like Rocket Raccoon or Thanos to green screen backgrounds for places like Wakanda or Planet Titan. And because of the combination of these elements, this is by far the best looking movie set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Although I do have slight nitpicks in regards to certain special effects, where maybe there's some areas that don't quite look fully rendered, like the combination of the Iron Man suit that Tony Stark wears or the Hulkbuster that you see later in the movie, to even the motion capture done for Corvus Glaive, I thought could have been a lot better, but honestly, if those are the worst aspects of the movie, I can live with it. And because I think this movie has such good production values, I am convinced that Marvel Studios wasn't screwing around when it came to the production of this movie and gathered all their eggs as far as employees go, regardless of its costume designers or special effects technicians, and put them into one basket, like the best of the best. And it shows. Another aspect to this movie that I liked is the movie's quick pacing, because, dear God, out of all the movies set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers Infinity War is so quick paced that you could have sworn you sat through a movie that was only an hour and 40 minutes in length. Yet, by the time you actually finish the movie, 2.5 hours of your life have gone by. Because the pacing in this movie is just that quick, which is really unusual because this movie has so much going on in regards to plot threads, character interactions, and battle sequences that, on pen and paper, this sounds like this would be such a drag to sit through. But it's not, which makes the pacing to this movie even more impressive, where it has to take all these elements and really balance them out. And I find that to be really impressive, that the movie can be this quick paced yet balance out all these different elements. And speaking of balance, I really like the way this movie handles its story, because when you really look at the plot of this movie, there is so much going on. You have the main plot thread of Thanos trying to collect all of the Infinity Stones in order to wipe out half of all life in the universe. Then you have the numerous subplots revolved around the heroes of the movie, where you got the first of many subplots revolved around Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange heading to Planet Titan in order to battle Thanos on his home turf in hopes that they can defeat the threat there before he arrives on Earth. Then you got the second subplot revolved around Thor meet up with the Guardians of the Galaxy and divide them up in order to go to some planet in order to build a weapon to kill Thanos with. Then you got the third subplot revolved around Star-Lord along with the other members of the Guardians of the Galaxy heading to nowhere in order to obtain the Reality Stone before Thanos gets his hands on it, only to end up on Planet Titan joining forces with Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Doctor Strange. Then you got the last subplot revolved around Captain America along with the remaining Avengers heading to Wakanda in hopes that maybe they can remove the Mind Stone from Vision's forehead and have Scarlet Witch destroy it. And on pen and paper, this movie should not work at all because of the amount of characters and subplots and action sequences that occur throughout this movie. Like, if anything, this movie has so much going on that you could have literally made 3 to 4 different movies out of this one script. Yet, the movie works better than expected. And the reason being that all of these subplots aren't just random, they're all connected. Because it's literally the same story being told through 4 different avenues going to the same location. That being, you got all these heroes in some shape or form trying to stop Thanos. And that's why this movie worked as well as it did. Like, if you were to give this script to any other director or scriptwriter, I don't think this movie would have worked as well as it did. And that's a testament to how good the Russo brothers are as filmmakers, where they are able to take all these different characters and subplots, but make them gel in a way that the movie works without falling apart. Another aspect to this movie that I liked is something that I think a lot of people would say is a big problem with the movie, that being the lack of character development. Since one of the most important aspects of filmmaking in regards to script writing is actually having fully fleshed out characters that actually have an arc from start to finish. Yet with a movie like this, you have so many characters that I think it would be humanly impossible to give every single character a story arc in this movie. But I think that's why this movie works without the character development, because we've had 18 other movies to really know all of these characters, regardless if it's the members of the Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, or the Kingdom of Wakanda. We've gotten to know all these characters in some shape or form. So when you see them interacting with each other in this movie, their characterization is very simplistic, and works to the movie's advantage. In the same way, the original Avengers movie had no character development because it was all about the character interactions. It just so happens that Infinity War happens to have a lot more characters in it. And speaking of character interactions, I find it so surreal that this movie exists with this huge ensemble cast of characters. Like, having an Avengers movie featuring Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and Hulk is one thing, but having a movie like this that not only has characters like the Avengers, but characters from the Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Panther, and Doctor Strange appearing all in one movie is just so surreal that I can't believe it actually happened. And it's the coolest thing ever. Since we finally get to see characters like Iron Man and Spider-Man interacting with characters like Doctor Strange and Star-Lord. Ever since the first Avengers movie came out, I didn't even think this was gonna happen as well as it did. And like I said earlier, it really shows how good the Russo brothers are as directors. Like, they know how to not only introduce characters to one another, but they also know how to utilize them within the movie. And it really shows just how patient the producers are over at Marvel Studios, where they took all this time to establish all these characters, introduce all these items and concepts, and really finding the perfect directors to really bring this cinematic universe together for this one movie, which I think is a crown achievement for the studio itself. I also like how certain character actions parallel one another. Case in point, the two obvious ones are the parallels between Star-Lord, Gamora, and Scarlet Witch and Vision, where you have the one character who either knows the knowledge of an Infinity Stone or possesses an Infinity Stone, and when the time comes, they tell the other character that if something were to happen to them, do this. And there are several moments like that throughout the movie. And sure enough, when that moment comes and the other character has to make that decision, you do indeed see that particular character go through with the plan and attempt to save the other person by killing them. And I find this to be really refreshing, because if this was any other kind of movie where you got one of the main characters who is in possession of some kind of MacGuffin or possesses knowledge of a MacGuffin, and you got the bad guy who's holding this person hostage, the main character is given this decision where it's like, well, in order to prevent the bad guy from getting a MacGuffin, I have to save my friend by killing them. And normally the route this would normally go would usually take the form of the hero is about to kill the other person, but at the last second they don't go through with the act and let the bad guy win. With the way this movie handles that type of situation, it's the other way around, in which you actually see the main heroes go through with the plan, but their action ultimately gets undone by Thanos. And speaking of Thanos, I know I'm not the first person to bring this up, but Thanos is by far one of the best villains, not just within the confines of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but just in movies in general. Because a lot of recent superhero movies, or just movies in general, have had villains that haven't really been all that good. Now sure, there have been some villains here and there that I did find to be enjoyable, in some cases a step in the right direction, but didn't quite make the mark in some other areas. Because most of the problems that people have with the villains, regardless if it's a villain from the MCU or outside of the MCU, comes down to this. Their motivations are very simplistic, they don't get enough character development, they're too comical, and they're not physically threatening to the heroes. But with Thanos, on the other hand, it's the complete opposite, where his motivation at first looks simplistic, since he wants to destroy half of all life in the universe. And when you learn as to why Thanos wants to go through with this plan, his motivation behind it is very tragic, where here's this character whose civilization went through extinction, and he doesn't want any other civilization to experience extinction, so his thought process is to save the universe by destroying half of it so the remaining half can live and prosper, so that those civilizations don't have to face extinction like his did. And the thing that makes his motivation so much more interesting than the average villain motivation is the fact that his motivation comes from a place of understanding. Where, yeah, you do see where he's coming from, and he does care about the universe, but at the same time, you don't want Thanos to succeed in destroying half of it in order to save it. Thanos is also one of the better developed villains in the MCU, where Thanos himself, even though he's the bad guy, he's actually not that bad of a guy. And I do have a problem with the depiction of Thanos in this movie, which I'll talk about later. But anywho, as far as Thanos' characterization in this movie goes, like I said earlier, he's not that bad of a guy, which makes him really interesting because although his plan does require him to kill half of all life in the universe, he doesn't view himself as the bad guy. He views himself as the good guy. Now, contrast this with a villain like Ultron from Age of Ultron, where his motivation is to protect the Earth by destroying all the humans on it. And the thing is, although Ultron ultimately does want to protect the Earth itself, he does realize that what he's doing is bad. And with Thanos again, as I said earlier, his motivation for going through with his plan is definitely relatable, and although the actions behind it are bad, Thanos himself doesn't view them as being bad, which makes him more interesting. Then there are the numerous interactions between him and the heroes, and the interaction that stood out to me the most is the conversation Thanos has with Doctor Strange. Because if this was any other villain, the villain would show up, have a monologue, start the fight with the hero, and attempts to take the Infinity Stone. With Thanos, on the other hand, it's the exact opposite, where when he does arrive, he doesn't monologue to Doctor Strange. He actually tries to have this civilized, intellectual conversation with Doctor Strange first in order to persuade Strange into handing over the Time Stone to Thanos. And as he's having this conversation with Doctor Strange, through his body language, you can tell that he wants the stone, but he doesn't necessarily want to fight Doctor Strange for the stone. He just wants him to understand his cause and just have Doctor Strange give him the stone. And when the fight does start, Thanos is not the one that initiates the fight. It's the heroes that start the fight, forcing Thanos to fight the heroes in a battle that he doesn't want to take part in. Then you get the fact that Thanos isn't really comical, because I think the biggest problem that Marvel has had with some of their more recent villains is the fact that they have become too comical to a point that they're not as threatening as they should be. With Thanos in this movie, he isn't seen cracking jokes. He's predominantly serious from start to finish. Although we do see him smiling occasionally, it's more in delight of the suffering he's causing to certain characters. And he's actually physically threatening. Case in point, as I said earlier, he's strong enough to essentially take down someone as powerful as the Hulk early on. And unlike other villains who spend a good chunk of the movie trying to get their hands on a singular Infinity Stone in hopes to use it against the heroes, Thanos spends the entire runtime of the movie gathering all of the Infinity Stones in order to achieve his goal. As far as Thanos' henchmen go, the Black Order, or as they're called in this movie, the Children of Thanos, I have mixed feelings towards them. Because on one hand, I think that it is really refreshing to see an Avengers movie where the main villain does have some henchmen to fight against, the likes of the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Because in the first Avengers movie, Loki's the main villain, and he mind controls Hawkeye at one point, but sometime before the last third of the movie, Black Widow gets into a fight with Hawkeye, knocks him out, and then when Hawkeye wakes up again, Loki's grasp on him is gone, and then Hawkeye joins the Avengers and fights Loki and the Chitauri army. In Avengers Age of Ultron, Ultron does have some henchmen in the form of the Maximoff twins, who are willing to work with Ultron. And they do for the first half of the movie, but once the Maximoff twins discover Ultron's true plan, they betray him and then join the Avengers. And thus, the climax to that movie is the Avengers with the Maximoff twins fighting Ultron along with his army of drones. With this movie, Thanos has henchmen from the get-go, and throughout the entire movie, when Thanos isn't around, the henchmen are seen battling the heroes throughout the movie and provide for some entertaining action sequences. And I find that refreshing. However, I do have a couple problems with the Black Order. One, in a movie like Avengers Infinity War, it's already overstuffed since it has the likes of the regular Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, the cast from Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Homecoming. And then this movie does a bold thing by introducing a group of new characters that we've never seen before. And the problem is, we really don't get to know the Black Order as characters. Hell, we don't even get to know their names, with the exception of one member, that being Ebony Maw, who's the space wizard that's got the whole nihilistic preacher thing going on. Like, that's really the only member of the Black Order I get a sense of character from. As far as the other three members of the Black Order go, you really don't get a sense of who they are as characters. Also, the remaining members of the Black Order, ranging from the likes of Clovis Glaive, Proxima Midnight, and Cull Obsidian, are useless because all three of them fail to obtain an Infinity Stone, because Ebony Maw is really the only member of the Black Order to succeed in obtaining an Infinity Stone by himself, whereas these three fail to obtain the other Infinity Stone, that being the Mind Stone. Because let me tell you how one of the battles plays out. Basically, you have Scarlet Witch and Vision battling Proxima Midnight and Clovis Glaive, glaive. And the battle goes on, and Vision is crippled by Clovis' glaive, and Scarlet Witch is about to be overwhelmed by the combined forces of both Proxima and Clovis. Then Captain America, Black Widow, and Falcon show up and turn the tables, which provides for a kick-ass sequence, mind you, but I have a problem with it, especially in relation to Clovis' glaive, because in the comics, Clovis' glaive is said to be Thanos' favorite lieutenant among the Black Order, and is the most well-rounded of the bunch. And in the movie, he's shown to be physically just as powerful as the Vision, who is one of the strongest members of the Avengers, and he manages to cripple Vision. Yet once Captain America, Black Widow, and Falcon show up, he gets into a fight with Black Widow, and she's just kicking his ass. And this doesn't make any sense, because before this, he was fighting Vision and tossing him around like a ragdoll, yet he fights against someone like Black Widow who doesn't have any superpowers and he's getting his ass whooped. That doesn't really make any sense. Then you have Cull Obsidian, who's just overall a bad henchman. Like, he's so bad that Bruce fucking Banner manages to kill him without transforming into the Hulk, which was really disappointing because I did really want to see Cull Obsidian fight Hulk during that last third of the movie, but whatever. In terms of what I disliked about the movie is overstuffed, as many people are describing it, which makes sense considering the fact that not only are we focused on the cast of the usual Avengers movies, but we're also bringing the cast from Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and Guardians of the Galaxy, so the movie is bound to be overstuffed, which means several major characters don't get as much screen time, because characters like Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Vision, Captain America, Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket Raccoon, Thor, and Groot get plenty of screen time, but several other characters like War Machine, Falcon, Drax, Mantis, and the entire cast of Black Panther barely get any screen time in this movie. And that's just trying to incorporate characters that we've got to know through several other movies before this movie. And on top of that, the movie introduces some new characters, as I mentioned earlier, the Black Order being one of them. And because they're new additions to the movie, we barely get to know them as characters, and they barely get any screen time in the movie because they're trying to compete with all the other pre-existing characters for both character development and screen time. Then there are some plot points that just don't really add up, like how Thor knows about the destruction of Xandar, because at one point in the movie he gets rescued by the Guardians of the Galaxy and tells them that Thanos went to Xandar sometime last week to receive the Infinity Stone that's at Xandar. How does he know that? Because this movie takes place directly after the events of Thor Ragnarok, and Thor spent a good chunk of that movie in Sakaar, in which some characters established that they've been on Sakaar for about a week. So how and when Thor knew about the destruction of Xandar either had to happen during Thor Ragnarok or happen sometime before this movie even starts, where maybe we had a scene where Thanos describing how he got the Infinity Stone. We just never saw it, but again, it's just a detail that's never explained. Then you have the two plot holes revolved around Gamora. The first one being the fact that she's not the last of her kind, because back in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, when you have that one scene where the Nova Corps officers capture Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket, and Groot, when we're focused on Gamora and you have the Nova Corps officers giving exposition on her backstory, if you notice off to the left side of the screen where it has like written information, it states that she's the last of her kind. Yet in this movie, it's established that Thanos came to invade her planet and destroyed only half of the population while the other half survived. That doesn't really add up, unless if somehow off screen her entire kind suddenly got wiped out and she is the last surviving member of her kind. That detail doesn't add up. Then you have the whole plot hole revolved around Gamora knowing the whereabouts of the Soul Stone, because it's established that sometime way before the events of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, Thanos tasked Gamora with finding the Soul Stone, and according to Gamora, she somehow got her hands on a map, learned the location, burnt said map, told Thanos that it was a failure, and then proceeds to do something stupid, which was tag along with Star-Lord, Drax, and Mantis to prevent Thanos from getting his hands on the Reality Stone. And this causes two problems. One, when and where did you get this supposed map to the Soul Stone? And second, if you know this information, why did you go with Star-Lord, Drax, and Mantis to prevent Thanos from finding the Reality Stone? By simply being there, it's just one step closer for Thanos to obtaining another Infinity Stone. Like, wouldn't it have been better if Gamora went with Thor, Rocket, and Groot to help Thor get a new weapon, as opposed to tagging along with Star-Lord to prevent Thanos from getting his hands on the Reality Stone? And there are several other plot holes in the movie, like Heimdall sending Bruce Banner to Earth without the usage of the Bifrost, or how Scarlet Witch was able to get from point A to point D during the battle at Wakanda, and as I mentioned earlier with Black Widow battling Clovis Glaive kicking his ass for someone who has no superpowers going against someone that is physically stronger than her. I mean, I could probably list a lot more plot holes, but I think I'll stop there. Another problem that I had with the movie is the subplot revolved around Thor, Rocket Raccoon, and Groot going to this weapons-making planet so that Thor can create a new weapon to fight Thanos with. And I know I'm not the first person to bring up this particular subplot, but it does go on a lot longer than it should. Because anytime the movie cuts back to Thor attempting to make this weapon, it's just one of those things where there's so much that the characters have to do, where it's like, oh, in order to make the weapon, you have to do this, and this. And then all of a sudden, they make the weapon partially, but then it's like, shit, we need a handle. And it's just like, oh, come on. Like, I feel like this is like the one subplot that should have been wrapped up sooner. That way we could have focused on some other characters doing other things, like seeing War Machine, Falcon take part in the Battle of Wakanda, or seeing more of Drax and Mantis interacting with Spider-Man and Tony Stark. Another problem that I had with the movie actually revolves around Thanos, because as I said earlier, the combination of the character along with Josh Brolin's performance are really great to a point that I think Thanos is perhaps the greatest villain of the MCU. That still holds true. But the problem I have with Thanos in this movie, it's not the Thanos we deserved. Because at the end of the first Avengers movie, it's hinted that he was willing to fight the Avengers to court death. And when we see him in Guardians of the Galaxy talking to Ronan, he seems really eager to fight something, and is shown to be rather bloodthirsty through his few lines of dialogue. Then in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, you have Nebula, who's essentially telling campfire stories of her being raised by Thanos, and it sounds horrific, yet the Thanos in this movie isn't what we were building up to. Case in point, the Thanos that's been hinted at throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I can describe as being a warlord who wants to conquer the universe because he's in love with death. Yet in this movie, he's no conqueror, but an eco-terrorist who's actually really concerned about life on other planets and is willing to destroy half the population of the universe to do so. I also wasn't the biggest fan of the casual outfit that Thanos wore in the movie, because in the comics, he's usually known for wearing this iconic armor, and throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we see him wearing that armor, and I would have loved to have seen him fight like all of these various members of the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy while wearing that suit of armor, but we don't, which I found to be rather disappointing. And as for my last problem with the movie, it has to do with the way the movie ends, or at least the way people describe it. Because way before the movie came out, a lot of movie critics were describing the ending to this movie as being a massive cliffhanger. That's not necessarily true, because the way this movie concludes, it ends with Thanos waking up on some other planet at a farm watching the sunrise. That's the ending to the movie, and that's not a cliffhanger. Because normally the way narrative structure works, you have your beginning, then you have your rising action, which leads to the climax, which then leads to the falling action, followed by the ending. With this movie, we get all that. We do get our beginning, we do get our rising action, we do get our climax, and we do get our falling action, and it does come to an end. That's not a cliffhanger. If this movie did end on a cliffhanger, it would have ended like this. You have Thor tossing Stormbreaker at Thanos. It hits him, then you got Thor talking to Thanos, then you have that moment where Thanos says, "You should have aimed for the head," and then you see Thanos just about to snap his fingers, and as soon as he's about to, it cuts to black, you hear the snap, and then you have the credits roll. That's a cliffhanger. What we got was an actual proper climax, falling action, and conclusion. So why people describe this ending as being a cliffhanger is beyond me. So for my final verdict of Avengers Infinity War, this movie is essentially Captain America's Civil War in terms of adapting the story of the Infinity Gauntlet, because when Captain America Civil War was first announced, a lot of people were wondering, how are you supposed to adapt that story? Because you don't have access to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, or the Heroes for Hire. And what about the reason as to why this Civil War started? starts. Like, how are you supposed to incorporate that aspect into the movie? Yet the movie found a way to retweak the story in a way that would make sense for a movie using the ingredients that appear in all the other Marvel movies. Avengers Infinity War does the exact same thing on a much bigger scale, in that sense of it might not necessarily be a panel-for-panel adaptation of that comic, but like Captain America Civil War, it takes all the elements and characters that appeared in the other Marvel movies that came out before this and tweaks the story in a way that would make sense as a movie. And remember back in 2012 when the first Avengers movie came out and how everyone said that this movie is the best superhero movie because it celebrated anything and everything related to comic book culture? And I still agree with a lot of people who say that Avengers is still one of the best superhero movies out there because it celebrates the comic book culture so well. Infinity War, on the other hand, does the exact same thing but takes it to a whole new level that I didn't think was even possible. Like, out of all the MCU movies to come out today, this is perhaps the most ambitious movie in terms of the story it's telling, the cast of characters that are involved. It's just massive in the most epic sense of the word. Because growing up, I always loved movies that tell a story about how a cast of characters gather together to fight a common threat. Then at one point they get separated, fight some battles here and there, but then rejoin to fight that big threat. And the last movie I saw in theaters that really felt massive in the epic sense of the word was Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. Because back then, that movie was just, again, massive. And I sat there going, there's no way that this movie would ever get topped, in my opinion, as far as movies that feature epic battles go. Now, Avengers Infinity War has taken that spot for being that movie. Like, I don't think we'll ever see another movie quite like this in our lifetime, in terms of the massive roster of characters involved, the scope of the overall story, and most of all, ambition. Because not only do I think that this movie is the most ambitious movie within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think this is the most ambitious movie in the past 10 to 20 years that Hollywood has ever created. And I don't think we'll ever see a movie quite like this again. So, overall, Avengers Infinity War is very much like Captain America Civil War, just 100 times more massive. And before I give my rating, what did everyone else have to say about Avengers Infinity War? So it looks like the movie got generally good reception, and so for my final rating of Avengers Infinity War, I give it a 4 out of 5. So, before Avengers Infinity War even hit theaters, what are your top 5 movies ranked within the MCU? And see you later.